What's up, everyone? This is a video response to Williams' latest video on the New World Order and how it's taken over the world. Anyhow, I don't see it that way. If you've been watching the news the last few weeks or the last few years, you probably have noticed recently in Europe, uh, Macron, I think it's Prime Minister of France. He's either Prime Minister or President. I think the President's below the Prime Minister, so that's Macron. Anyways, he's been having a lot of yellow vest riots and out of control protesting in the streets. Anyways, latest in the last few days, he's backed down from his fuel tax on people. He still hasn't backed off his lessening of the wealth tax. Actually, he's proposing to get rid of it. I think he actually did that. Anyways, in general, I'm speaking more from a libertarian perspective. Personally, I don't think there should be a wealth tax, but neither should there really be any tax on fuel. And what Macron did is he gave an increase in some unemployment, and I'll get to why that's important in a moment, and a few other things. He's increased the unemployment benefit and I think lowered the tax on retirees or people with pensions. Anyways, why I want to point out that that's important is because recently in the news, this also has to do with the New World Order. Italy has proposed to increase their official budget compared to what they're supposed to. I think in the EU it's either 2.5% or 3%. You're not supposed to have a budget deficit of more than 2.5 or 3%. Anyways, the reason I mention is because with all this chaos going on and how William thinks the New World Order is taking over, or will come back to take over, apparently, is I want to point this out, is in Italy, the right's actually gained in the last election. And why that's important is because, and interesting, is the right, traditionally conservatives are for lower taxes and less regulation and stuff like that. But like conservatives in the USA, that's not really true. You very rarely hear a Republican talk about, unless he's talking rhetorically, talking about cutting welfare or cutting Social Security. In fact, for a Republican to consider cutting Social Security benefits is sacrilege. It's just not going to happen, especially to cut the benefit of the military budget or the off budget for like Department of Defense and things of that nature, the intelligence budgets. Anyways, in Italy, the right has proposed a higher budget deficit and increased social benefits to unemployment pensioners and things of that nature. That's why I'm pointing this out. Well, now that France has bent over backwards somewhat to the protesters, now Italy's pushing harder to let them get out of their budget deficit restraints. Why is all this important? Because if France goes and then Italy goes, the EU is basically finished. I personally think it is. We'll see how they hold together. Either the Germans are going to kick everyone out of the Eurozone, or the Germans are going to kick themselves out. I don't know what will happen. But another good example of the one world government or the New World Order losing control is we can see Theresa May, the Prime Minister in England. She tried to push through her deal of getting out of the EU, and it didn't go over too well with the left or right, with the right or the Labour Party. Just I won't get into details over it, but the package or her proposal didn't seem to work out too well, and now we'll see what happens in March 29th. But let's say the New World Order gets their dream or whatever and pushes through something autocratically. Well, I think what will happen in the UK is they'll protest, maybe not like the French, but they will not cooperate. What I'm saying in all this is the government's totally lost legitimacy in the EU and Britain, and even in the US. We've seen that with the election of Donald Trump. Now, me, I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump. I don't care for his trade policies, although just to be clear, his tariffs haven't really amounted to much. If you add them up, not in dollar terms, but in percentage terms, it's about 2 or 3%, not really a big deal. Not like the 1920s or 30s when we put on tariffs and then we went into the Depression. It's nothing like that. And I'm not sure if they'll work something out with China. I don't know. But I do think the whole world's going to come into recession. That will probably move a lot more countries over to the right. But before that'll happen, they'll probably move the U.S. at least into the left. You'll see the Democrats gain control. and you'll see all their dreams come true with a bunch of social spending, which won't really amount to much. The economy will slow down, it'll continue to slow down, and it won't get any better. Then will we see the economy or the politics moves? I don't really know. Have no idea, but none of this one world government is going to pull through. And the reason I mention all this is because we're going into recession. As we go into recession, the U.S., Europe, China even will have to increase their budget deficits even more than they are. How they will pull that off without a bond market crisis, without a currency crisis in the U.S. or the euro in the euro land, or the Chinese currency, I don't see how that's not going to happen. So either you get a bond market crisis or a currency crisis, or what I think a combination of both. And you'll see, no matter who's in power in government, you'll see a slashing of all social spending up to including probably not cutting Social Security or Social Security in the EU, but freezing it. They probably won't raise it. Anyways, that's just how I see it. As far as William has suggested some solutions to all this, which I actually agree with. But I agree with these whether there's a one world government or not, and they're a good idea just in general. Now, if you watch William's latest video, he gave an example of a really small, he calls it a room, but a really small apartment for about, I think, $70 or $70 US dollars per month. That's a good example where you can move to a country and you could basically pay 1 month's rent in advance, or 1 year's rent in advance, and it wouldn't really kill you if you're from a first world country. Well, for $70 a month, that's really cheap. And William also, in some of his latest views, suggested you could teach. He may not have put it in a video. He may have just sent this to me privately, but I can't remember. But he pointed out how you can teach English in the capital with or without credentials. I don't know if William's going to get upset for me for saying that, but in Latin America, people don't give a flying flip on your credentials. Even if you have them, they usually just throw them in the waste paper basket. At least that's what my friends tell me. But anyways, under certain circumstances, you may need college to get the legitimate, visa to teach there. But there's, workarounds, I'll just say. Anyways, in some of his latest videos, he pointed out how you could earn at the higher end $10 to $12 an hour teaching at some of these schools, and you can actually earn more giving private lessons. Now, I'm not sure what the market is in Peru, so I won't comment if that's even possible. But in Mexico, you can. And I want to just mention kind of another thing you can do. As William pointed out, you can teach part-time. If you just teach part-time for $10 an hour, $20 or 20 hours a week, you can get $200 a week, and that's $800 a month. That's not even counting doing side gigs like tutoring kids, like in either English or in math or whatever. Believe it or not, in some of these countries, you can tutor in other things outside of English, but in English, like tutoring math in English, and earn, $25 an hour. But anyways, I won't get into that right here. I just want to point out something some of my friends are doing. Of course, I'll get some pushback, but nevertheless, I'll tell you what they're doing. Like in Guatemala and Mexico, I know quite a few people teaching for the Chinese schools online. Now, to be clear, the Chinese schools I'm talking about, oops, there goes the camera. Anyways, one of these schools is owned by the Financial Times or the Pink newspaper. I forget what the name of the company is, but it's part of the Financial Times, and they own schools and they own testing companies you can work for too privately. I know some women in the U.S. who do that. They correct tests, and I can't remember the name of the head company, but the Financial Times is one of the companies that's owned. The reason I mention it is because it's a high street company, and it says clearly if you're testing papers or going over that, or if you're teaching English online through the Chinese schools, these Chinese schools have contracted with this company that the Financial Times own, and they specifically state you have to have a college. Well, I'm telling you, that's not really the case. And what they do, either intentionally or unintentionally, I think it's unintentionally, they know what's going on, but they don't care because they're so desperate for teachers. Anyways, these Chinese schools say you have to have college, but I know quite a few people who just have GEDs. Like myself, I have a GED. And they never ask you to provide a GED. I can tell you what they do is you go online and you fill out the form they have. You just put, there's a thing you can click that says other. You click other, you put a GED in. I think that's their loophole that the Chinese like and the company in the UK likes. You can just put that in there. No one ever asks you for it or makes you prove you have it. Anyhow, I know two people here in Guatemala. They work part-time, and that's all they had. And I asked them specifically when I was at their house, did they actually want you to send a certified copy or just a copy of your GED? And they said no, they didn't really care. Anyways, for this Chinese company, which I won't name, but it's specifically owned by that company that owns the Financial Times. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. And they also own this other company where you can test papers. I know a lady in the U.S. who does that. It pays pretty good. But these companies, or this specific company, pays about 18 to 25 or 26 bucks an hour, depending on the exchange rate. Anyhow, I'm just putting that out there as a couple side gigs you can do, like William talks about. You can earn enough money just from one of those, excuse me, one of those gigs to pay your rent, pay your food, and maybe save a few bucks. I can just tell you, living here in Central America where I live, if I don't travel, I don't spend anything more than $600. My rent's $250. And that's going out, paying for dates, going out for dates, and buying drinks and all that jazz and dinner. Now, if you go out on dates every night and you're spending 20, 30 bucks a plate, of course that's going to be more than 600, probably 800, 900, still under $1,000. Now, when I travel around, I'll spend 800 to 1,200 bucks, but right now I'm doing some stuff online, so I'm not really traveling. So that's a good point William makes as far as if you want to leave the country. Another point he didn't specifically get too in detailed in is, if you go offshore, you go outside the U.S., you can get a second or third passport if you only have the one. And as he points out, Peru, in his other videos, Peru can be a good option, as can be Guatemala. Another good option, maybe not for a passport, but for residency, would be Paraguay. Another good option is if you have a college degree, or even if you don't, but you can get a part-time job in Chile. As long as you work, I can't remember if it's 20 hours or a little less than 20 hours, you can get a permanent residency. I believe in 2 years you can have citizenship, but I might be wrong. But you only have to work a part-time job in Peru to get that residency. I can't remember if you have to have a college. I don't think you do. In fact, back in the day you did. They could have changed that. I myself was going to do that, but I didn't want to do that. There's kind of a loophole in how you can almost pretty much guarantee yourself to get a job there. I won't go into that there. It's something that's probably going to inflame people, but there are companies that 100% hire you and pay you part-time, and you will get that, but I won't say what the loophole is. It's not appropriate. But anyways, I can't remember anything else William said, but leaving the country, he mentions having a business, but starting an online or an offline business and leaving the country can give you a lot of different options. I think those are great ideas, whether there's a one world government or whether they're succeeding or failing. My opinion is they're failing. You can see it in the U.S. You can see it in Euroland, and the one world government hasn't really got much going on in Latin America or most of Asia anyways, but it's like they're trying to herd cats and they're not doing a good job. I was going to point out a few other things, but I don't think I will. This video has gone on for about 12, 13 minutes now. But all in all, I just wanted to send this response that you do have options if you really feel there's this push for world government, and if you really feel things are going to get bad. My view is things will get bad, but it has nothing to do with the one world government. It has to do with upcoming recession in Euroland in the U.S. and in China specifically. Keynesian hasn't worked out too badly, and I believe we're going to have a currency crisis. Probably not in the U.S. at first. It'll be in Euroland, and then a bond crisis, which will be more like in the U.S. And then the Federal Reserve in Euroland, and Central Bank of Japan and China will print like crazy. They will print like crazy, which will lead to a currency crisis. Possibly, you might see $2,000 or $3,000 an ounce for gold. I think it's probably pretty likely, but we're too soon into the game to have an idea about that. But anyways, if you believe those things are going to happen and you choose or you do not want to live in your home country, expediting is a good idea. I still think the United States, Canada, Mexico, Central America, South America are good options. I personally don't care for Western Europe or Eastern Europe, so I have no comment. People think Eastern Europe's a good deal. I respectfully disagree. That my ancestors are from that part of the world, and there's a reason they got out of there. It's because when there's crisis, the rule of law don't mean shit. Just ask Jews or Gypsies or recent investors in Eastern Europe. When I say Eastern Europe, I'm not talking about the Czech Republic specifically. I'm talking about people's bad experiences in like Bosnia. Those places going way east. Not the Baltic, well, some with the Baltic countries, but Bosnia, places like that, like Ukraine. I'm thinking there's a lot more, even Georgia. But out of all those places, Georgia would be where I'd go. But that's because there's some unique things going on there, business-wise. and banking wise and things that you don't really hear too much about online. One more thing. William did touch on this, but believe it or not, there's so many opportunities to bank pretty privately. I don't mean like personally. I mean if you have a corporation, specifically if you own less than 10% of the shares as a U.S. person, it's not a reportable event. And if your name isn't on the bank account, if your name is, it will be reportable. So you need to own less than 10%, and your name to. You can't use your password open, but other than that, you can bank pretty quietly. You can earn a good income as long as the income's coming outside of that jurisdiction. As an U.S. expat, if you earn less than $100,000, it would be tax-free. Of course, you can set things up so it's so invisible that you probably wouldn't mention that. I say that because you don't own the shares in the company or less than 10% in your bank in your name. So what's the report? Anyhow, I'm not giving legal advice, not giving things like that, but run by their account. And for people who are skeptical, Americans do this. I want to name certain names, but I can't because they'll just piss them off. But big multinationals do this all the time. I'll use IBM. I'm not talking about IBM, but some of the big tech companies. We all know who they are. If you use software, 80% of the people out there will know who I'm talking about. And then there's if you use a browser, you know who I'm talking about. There's only one browser. But anyways, I won't get into that here. But there's so many opportunities to set up a company quietly. There's so many, even in the U.S., a New Mexico company, until they change their law, you can shield ownership. You cannot shield your tax situation. I'm not suggesting that. But if you need to own assets in North America pretty privately, you can. Anyways, I'm just pointing out there's a lot of opportunities out there, and don't get too discouraged if you think this one world government's going to take over. So far as we've seen in Italy and France, even just more recently, and recently with the election of Donald Trump, things are not going well for both the left and the right. And we're seeing alt-right. I don't really agree with the alt-right, but alt-right politics springing up all over in Europe, and definitely the government and one world government is losing legitimacy. Oh, one more thing, where it's really lost a lot of legitimacy, and you can plainly see it, is in these climate accords. No one's going to sign on to it. The U.S. ain't signing on to it. And when I was a kid, when Bill Clinton was out, he didn't sign on to it, namely because he was smart enough, or his advisor was smart enough to realize if he signed on to that, he'd have to shut down a lot of factories, and those factory jobs would go to China. And why does Europe and China, or Brazil for that matter, want to ship all these jobs to China or Vietnam? Probably now it's going to be Vietnam, but anyways, this video is now 17 minutes. Anyhow, I'll just upload this. Leave a comment. Tell me what you think. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. I'll try to answer them as best as I can. All right. Thanks. Take care. Like, share, subscribe, and tell me what you think.